really want to continue making stuff for this channel and continuing discussions about LPL players, because even though maybe the LPL fan base isn't that huge in the English-speaking community, I still think there are a lot of people who are really dedicated LPL fans, and I think this is important, and having people talk about these topics, and maybe me talking on a video continues to keep people discussing stuff in the LPL and continue thinking about some of these topics. So I really like to get involved with that sort of thing, and I hope that this video is somewhat interesting. So the topic today that I want to talk about is Clearlove retcons, and I specifically use the word retcon because I used to be really involved in like the Final Fantasy VII community and doing interpretation of Final Fantasy VII game events and talking about the story and the lore in that, and then how all the second generation of content came out and how it kind of retracted a lot of the statements and a lot of the information that was in the old games. And so I feel like this is appropriate because Clearlove has this idea of this mythos around him. So it feels like as more people get interested in Clearlove and his legacy takes on a life of his own, and people start changing some of the story, changing some of the Clearlove myth, so to speak. So this video is about someone who has watched Clearlove for a while and watched a lot of his VODs, and some thoughts on what some of these ideas about Clearlove and some of these comments that I see on threads a lot, and whether or not I agree with them, and some of them that are very clearly kind of added to make him seem more impressive or less impressive than he is. So I know that some Clearlove fans might get annoyed with this video. Some people who aren't Clearlove fans and don't really like Clearlove might get annoyed with this video, but here are my thoughts on a few of the most common phrases that I see when people talk about Clearlove. And this has become a pretty big topic, right? Because whenever big international events start getting closer, people start to say, oh, who are the best players internationally? You know, who are the best junglers? Who are the best, like, who's going to show up at this tournament? Just really wreck everyone. Just wreck them so hard they don't remember their name. They don't remember where they were born. Yeah. So his name comes up a lot. And there are three questions that people are asking a lot more this year than I think they ever have before. And the first one is, where does Clearlove sit on the list of greatest players of all time? Is he second now? Is it fair to say he's second? A lot of people have been saying he's second. Is Clearlove the greatest jungler of all time? Has he surpassed Dandy from kind of this an untouchable figure? And is Clearlove the greatest Chinese player of all time? Those are the main three questions that I'm going to try to talk about at the end of the video and give my interpretation on them, and then you guys can think about it yourself, but I want you to think about them with a few of these comments that I have in mind. The first thing that I see on Reddit a lot that I don't really think is true is that Clearlove has been one of the best junglers in the world since Season 2, and he's one of the best junglers, and he deserves to be considered like the greatest jungler of all time, because since he's really been known in Season 2, he was playing a little bit before that, from Season until now, he's been consistently one of the greatest junglers, and this made me think of a moment on Summoning Insight. If you've seen a lot of the Summoning Insight episodes, you might remember what I would consider my second worst Summoning Insight appearance, which was when Monty and Thorne specifically brought me on to talk about where Clearlove ranked before the start of Season 5 among the list of the greatest players of all time. And both of them said that he doesn't deserve to be included on the list, and that they'd rather, when talking about great WE players, include like Wei Xiao and Messiah at the time. And I said that I would rather have Clearlove on the list than Messiah, and they asked me what I meant by this, because I had also been kind of critical of Clearlove as a jungler at the time, and so my response was, I don't think he's a good jungler, but he's a really good player. And this is part of what spawned the whole Kate Upton breasts thing, because it's like you focus on the fact that he's a good team fighter and all these other things, but you ignore other parts. I think that to an extent, Clearlove, earlier on in his career, first he had to figure out where he needed to be on the map at the during good times, and he always wanted to farm up to be this kind of late game, more influential carry style. And I think there are a couple of competing things with this, because Clearlove's always been really great in solo queue, and he's just a monster in solo queue. He has no fear, he goes to lane, he takes kills, he snowballs out of control, whereas I think it's Season 2, Season 3, Season 4, he was much more paced jungler where he would farm a lot. He would kind of leave his lanes to do whatever and hope that his lanes could handle it, and then he would come out in the late game and be this big carry force and this big team fighter, and he could play tanks really well. He could play certain assassins really well. He played like the Zed jungle game where the WE held lanes, and it was similar to some of the stuff KT was doing at the time with Insect. In the end, typically one of the biggest criticisms that I think were pretty valid is that Clearlove just didn't really have a lot of lane presence. He really didn't, and he didn't necessarily compensate for not having lane presence. And there was a valid point to be made, especially about his play in Season 4, which is that Clearlove a lot of times would be on the right side of the map, right? He would be in position where he knew his lane would be threatened, where he knew the enemy jungler was, but he wouldn't necessarily react in a proactive way. So it didn't really necessarily matter that he wasn't in the wrong place or that he knew where the enemy jungler was going to be, because he didn't do anything about it. And maybe he did. Maybe in comms he would say, oh, by the way, dude, this guy is going to gank top. I'm here if you need me. And the guy would just get ganked top and not say anything to Clearlove, or he wouldn't react when Clearlove told him this. Maybe it was a communication issue, but it just seemed to happen a lot. And it was, again, like I said, a consistency thing, because if you saw Clearlove in playoffs, especially in 2014 season, he was just crazy, right? He would gank bottom really proactively. He would go into the enemy jungle and kill the jungler. He just turned into this different player, and I think part of it, at the time I tried to explain it because it happened in playoffs as him kind of taking it easy during regular season and then ramping up in playoffs. I don't think this was actually true at the time, but also, like I said, he's this crazy solo queue player, and it was just a matter of him finding an ability, I think, to consistently tap into this style of play in more professional games. And I think when you watch him in 2015, 2016, you see that Clearlove a lot more. And Chinese fans refer to this as like dark Clearlove and light Clearlove, right? Very famously, where he has this game where he just goes off and he seems evil and possessed, and then light Clearlove kind of just farms and comes out in team fights in the late game. But he always, within the parameters of light Clearlove, was like very consistent, very respectable as a late game team fighter, as someone who knew where to be, as someone who could help his team turn games around if they fell behind early. But if they fell behind early, it was usually because he didn't necessarily have the same pressure as the enemy jungler, etc., etc. So for me, I just think it's not fair to say that Clearlove has been one of the consistently best junglers in the world since Season 2 because of these particular issues that he had prior to Season 5. So I would say that you can give him like 2 straight seasons of really consistently good, like high level, could be considered one of the just best junglers in the world play. And before that, it was like he was good in really specific aspects that you could maybe make a case for him being one of the best players, but he wasn't necessarily a good jungler. And then I remember when Monty heard this, he made some ridiculous claim that not ridiculous, but he said that I sounded ridiculous, which, yeah, I mean, it does sound a bit ridiculous, but to me it made sense. So the next one that I want to talk about is the idea that Clearlove has always been kind of the leader or shot caller of the team, which, first of all, in Team WE, this is not true. The team has credited the early seasons with Wei Xiao as kind of the big shot caller, and this is one of the reasons why people thought, oh, AD carry shot callers are good, right? Because Wei Xiao is an AD carry shot caller, and then this evolved from there where people decided that you can't be mechanical and shot call at the same time, and then some of the shot calling reigns in Season 3 went over to Messiah, and the team started playing differently, and the team started splintering apart, and there were a bunch of infighting issues in Team WE that this video is not about. But Clearlove wasn't really ever a shot caller in WE, and when they went to Edward Gaming, it sounds like FCZF had a huge role in some of the comms, but it depends on who you talk to, because, for example, like Name will say that he would always lead his lanes. Before he played with Mata, he would always be the guy calling the shot in lane, so that side, it sounds like maybe FCZF didn't talk as much during laning phase, and then in team fights, you would hear things like FCZF said, no, we can win, I'm going to go here and do this and this and this, so it sounds like a little bit like FCZF made some of those calls in the mid and late game, but it's not completely 100% clear who was the shot caller, but at the same time, with Clearlove's shot calling style, as it has been described in 2015 and 2016, is very democratic. So people will have this idea that certain players who are noted as good team leaders and shot callers always micromanage their team, right? And they tell everyone to go here and what item to build. And I would say like the only player who has really ever been described in this way and who people have said actually does this is probably Reaper, right? Reaper, great player, definitely on my list of top 20 players ever. He's had this ability to micromanage all this stuff, but the way that people describe Clearlove's shot calling style is kind of everyone makes some sort of call and Clearlove says no, we're going with this. So it's very collaborative where everyone on the team is talking. And at the 2015 World Championship, Clearlove said we're kind of not really talking to each other, and I asked him if it was a language issue, and he said no, I don't really think it's a language issue, it's just we're not talking for some reason. There were a lot of weird things going on with Yuichi at 2015 World Championship, and some of them maybe one day people will talk about more publicly, but right now, I mean, it's not like anything shady was happening, it's just kind of a little silly. So I won't really talk about it. So I don't think it's fair to say that he was like this micromanaging shot calling guy, and I actually wrote an article on this because people were comparing Clearlove to High and the High effect, and how I think there are noticeably different ways in which High and Clearlove have impacted the team, and I don't think High was necessarily this micromanaging shot caller guy either. So it's really unfair to say that Clearlove is this kind of leader, this kind of commanding figure. But I don't think that means he's a bad shot caller or a bad team leader. It just means that he doesn't necessarily have the game impact that people have credited him for in his own calls or in the way that he talks about the game. And it's not like he's explaining to his teammates how to play during the game. I don't think anyone shot calls like this right now anyway, because a lot of people believe that it's very important that players know how to make their own decisions in games so that we're not reliant on some guy telling you what to do before an action occurs and then not being able to react to it. My third favorite Clearlove retcon, this actually might be my favorite Clearlove retcon, is Clearlove always chokes at international events. Now, this is my favorite because when they talk about international events, they're speaking specifically about World Championship. Because if they're talking about international events very specifically, you can come up with a list of international events where Clearlove and his team is at least placed like top 2, top 3, where he clearly was not choking. He clearly was not joking. For example, Mid-Season Invitational, IPL 5. But let's talk about the Worlds, because maybe Clearlove has this weird, very specific thing where he goes to World Championships and he's like, this is my dream and I'm going to choke really hard. And I don't think that this is reasonable to say, because in every single situation where Clearlove has performed poorly at a World Championship or where his team has stopped at quarters, there are reasons why this has happened, and I'm not saying in an excuses type way, but in a way that reflects Clearlove's playstyle and owns specific issues and problems with his playstyle. So let's start specifically with the Season 2 World Championship. Did Clearlove choke at Worlds? Well, he ended in the quarterfinals, so we have that. He was facing a team that most people considered very good at the time, which was the Froggen team, CLGEU, and this is like the most famous technical delay in Riot Games League of Legends tournament history, where they had this 11-hour pause and everyone was talking all the time and the matches had to be rescheduled, and it ended 2-1, and a lot of Chinese fans are very adamant about this being a situation where W was robbed. But if you watch them at the time, they had very specific like blitzcrank type strategy that they really relied on, and part of the reason for this was they had literally been a team for maybe like a month and a half since both Clearlove and SEZF had joined them. Their last international tournament was that OGN, right? And they changed a couple players since then, and they'd only really been together with that roster for a month. So I don't think it's reasonable to say that WE should have won that tournament. WE had more strategies, WE were robbed. I think you could make that argument with the technical issues, but at the same time, you look at this tournament and it's kind of like, I mean, it doesn't look like Clearlove specifically choked there. There were certain team reasons why this didn't work, and if you look at his individual play, it's not like he performed worse or in some bad way than he had during the regular season in Season 2 or in the previous games that he'd been playing. So I don't think it's reasonable to say Clearlove choked at Season 2 Worlds. So that leaves 2 more tournaments. Did he choke in Season 4 and Season 5 World Championship? And these are more relevant because it's with the Edward Gaming team, and it's much more recent. Maybe this is something that he's developed. Season 4 World Championship, there were again extenuating circumstances, and I'm not going to blame them a lot because we're not talking about Edward Gaming specifically, we're talking about Clearlove's play specifically, but the Name was ill thing, I think, had a big impact on the team. The fact that they were actually scrimming some with Firelolly as the AD carry can really affect or change the team dynamic. I think in general, if you watch some of the videos about this team while they were there, they were really down because they were losing a lot more scrims than they thought they would, and so this mentally impacted them. There were a couple of games where I think Clearlove played really well, and a couple of games that he played really poorly in, like the Eve game in the third game against Starhorn Royal Club in quarterfinals, where he locks in Evelyn and he basically brute force carries the game. He just kills everyone. He's really, really proactive. He plays extremely well. He gets the bot lane first. All these other things that I think you can't really say Clearlove in general choked at this international event. It's just not reasonable to say based on that. Again, because the other games where, specifically, if we talk about the first game they played against Samsung White, where he literally buys a Sightstone, and this was considered really weird that a jungler would buy a Sightstone at the time, but if you think about how much Samsung White warded and how proactive they were with warding, it made sense, I think, to have Clearlove do some extra warding, and he literally just spent the game warding. I don't think he farmed, I don't think he ganked, I don't think he had any kind of lane pressure. He just farmed, he just warded everything, and EDG still almost had some good teamfight comebacks, and this isn't necessarily contrary to what we'd seen from Clearlove during the regular season, because as I said, there were some games where he just wouldn't show up in Season 4, and there were games at this tournament where he just didn't show up in Season 4. And I think that there were games in this tournament where he went crazy. And there were games in Season 4 where he went crazy. So it's really not, you can't say this game was, you can't say someone is choking if this person plays like they do their entire year leading up to it. I don't think it's reasonable to say that he choked in Season 4. So that leaves one international tournament left, okay, that I haven't addressed, the 2015 World Championship most recently. This isn't something where you can say, oh, EDG just don't get past quarterfinals because they have weird internal drama every time for some reason. No, I don't think, that's not even something I'm arguing. It's just something that people will bring up when you talk about it. But when you watch the specific problems Clearlove had at the Season 5 World Championship, it had a lot to do with the meta change and the fact that Clearlove didn't react to the meta change. So when you watch Clearlove play, even now, he's really, really good at ganking bottom lane. He's really, really good at getting to the bottom lane, going through the lane to gank, and he does this particular pass over and over and over again. It's not the definition of insanity, but the definition of perfecting a technique where you just do something over and over and over, this gank. So even though people know what's happening, he still is able to be effective with it. But when you watch him path around and get this sort of idea around top lane, it's a little bit more difficult for him. He likes to go through the blue side blue buff area and gank, if he's playing on red side, the blue side blue buff area and gank between the two turrets. This is one of his go-tos. He usually ganks later when he's on red side. it just, for some reason for him, the top lane isn't something he's as practiced ganking. And I think if you think about Clearlove as a player in particular, he's a player that took years, as we already discussed in kind of the first point, to get to this point where he could really tap into the type of player that can come out and just be really consistent with at his peak, like who can hit his peak level really well. So if he's a player who's been really practiced at ganking the bottom lane his entire career, he's had these crazy AD carries. He's had Wei Xiao, he's had Deft, he's had Name, all players who have been considered the best AD carry player in the world at the time in which they were on a team with him. It's like his top laners have had nowhere near the acclaim. Like the best rated one was probably Korra 1, and there were some like fringe Sao Mei fans, but Sao Mei, Korra 1, now he has Mouse, Amazing J. These are all players that people don't necessarily rank as highly, so part of that is probably that he just left them on an island to die repeatedly, right? Part of it is also that they're prioritizing the bottom lane a lot, so he's used to ganking bottom a lot. So as a player who took a while to get to the point where he is the player that he is, being able to necessarily path around top and play with a carry top laner is going to be something that isn't natural to him, or that's something that he can adapt to right away. And I think that's reasonable to say as a criticism of Clearlove. Doesn't mean he chokes at Worlds, because if you watch his pathing, it's just really awkward trying to play around Korra 1. He came to the lane at like level 5 when Korra 1 is Fiora. What are you supposed to do ganking a level 5 Fiora? She does really well at level 6. You need to get there at level 6, and there were just a lot of weird issues in general that seemed like there were communication issues, that seemed like he didn't really have the right synergy with Korra 1 for those games. I think the fact that they tried these new strategies very suddenly also threw them off. But do I think that this is something that you can look at and say necessarily this is a choking moment? No. No, I don't think you can look at that moment and say this is a choking moment. So I've looked at some of the biggest, what I consider Clearlove retcons, right? First of all, I don't think he's the best jungler in the world since one of the best junglers in the world since season 2. I don't think that's fair to say. I think most of the times you would consider a bunch of other junglers before you consider him. I think he only really made it on the list in season 5. Clearlove has always been like this leader and shot caller. I don't think that that's true. And his shot calling style isn't this didactic kind of take no prisoners. Don't get me wrong, I think Clearlove is a very strict team captain in his own way, because a lot of people will say that if he's on your team, he will just tell you to practice, he will make you practice and be like, let's play. And he's very single-minded about this, and if you ask him kind of what happened, he's like, you haven't seen the real EDG, I will show you the real EDG. Like this idea that this isn't even really my real power level. He can be very intense like that, but I don't think he's this weird mastermind shot caller type guy. And even if he is, that doesn't necessarily matter a lot for certain people's criteria of really good players. Finally, the thing that Clearlove always chokes at international events, which I find really funny, because there's very little evidence to support this, because he just always plays like he does in the regular season. It's pretty simple. So now that we have all this information, let's start to talk a little bit. First of all, is Clearlove the second greatest player of all time? No, I do not think he is. I think there are quite a few candidates that you could put over him. I think you could still put Mata over him. Why is this the case? Again, because those earlier seasons, I don't think he was one of the greatest players ever. I think that the cumulative growth that we saw him over that could put him like 12th on the list at the time. And maybe he's top 10 now. I'd say top 10, top 5. But I don't think he's the second greatest. I think you could still make a good case for Mata, for example. Especially now that Mata has won LPL and he's literally molded some of these Chinese players into a couple of other examples. But I wouldn't say that he's the second greatest player of all time. Is Clearlove the greatest jungler of all time? Now, I'm going to talk a little bit in more detail with this, because I think he's really close at this point. But again, because of the history, you're really only looking at 2 years where Clearlove has been one of the best junglers, if not the best jungler in the world, compared to what a lot of people credit him for, which is 5 years. So I don't think it's as fair. I think that he's close to the top of the list, but he has very specific issues that I've already discussed, which is just this apparent inability to play around top. Even recently, EDG played Gangplank against Newbie, and they played... And Newbie isn't a good team, but this was one of the first times where we'd kind of seen Mouse on a carry champion, and it just didn't get off the ground, and Mouse just got ganked repeatedly. Clearlove was farming around his lane, and it wasn't clicking, and part of that is just he got ganked really early and died. And there's not a lot you can do about that as a jungler. You can kind of hope to come for the counter gank, but at that time, the other two players are already so far ahead, so maybe this isn't something you can necessarily lay at his doorstep, but I think that he's still showing signs of having less effectiveness playing around the top lane. Maybe you blame Mouse more, but for me, I think since we've seen this in Clearlove's history, we can levy this claim against him. And when we talk specifically about, for example, let's say Clearlove versus bengi, which is something that people like to bring up a lot, and I think both Clearlove and bengi have certain problems. I think Clearlove overall has been more adaptable because he's been able to adapt to a bunch of different metas, specifically speaking to play certain champions. He can play tank champions, he can play heavy farm champions, he can play gank champions, he can play all these types of things, whereas I think there are just periods of time in the game where bengi isn't good. Like, flat out. Like, right now, I don't think bengi is that good, because more carry junglers means it's really hard for bengi to adapt or bengi to feel comfortable. Bengi likes to literally ward bot. And I think bengi is good, and at the 2015 World Championship at the end of the year, when people said, who do you give best jungler of the year to? Well, bengi was able to adapt his pathing really well, which is something Clearlove struggles with a little bit, I think, but not his champion pool. So at the time, at the 2015 World Championship, this was something that was very relevant. So I think for the 2015 Worlds, you have to give the best performing jungler to bengi. Overall throughout the year, maybe not, but because he was able to tap into the skill that was relevant for the tournament, or the adaptation that was relevant for the tournament. If the tournament had very suddenly shifted towards 80 only junglers, I think bengi would have been screwed, and Clearlove would have done much better. But at the time, that was the adaptation that was necessary, so you have to give the 2015 World's Best Jungler to bengi. And I think that this criticism is something that we'll probably be able to level against him for a while, and maybe in a couple of years Clearlove will surprise us all again, and he'll just be this very versatile jungler who can take gank top or bottom and mid, and maybe he'll play with a carry top at one point, and he'll have to learn the skill, and this will be the thing he does. But right now, this is something that you have to levy against him. And almost every jungler has some kind of flaw like that. Like, I think Dandy's thoughts on the game and how the game should be played as a jungler get in the way of his own ability to be more flexible sometimes, because he's never going to be this selfish type jungler. I think he's also never going to be this jungler who doesn't think about his own matchup against the enemy jungler very well as something that's very important, though he's really good at that right now. But I think right now you have to say the greatest jungler of all time was Dandy. Because, as I already very recently argued in an article, I think Dandy has been good. Dandy has just been good for most of the time. Since Season 3, Season 4, Season 5, even now in Season 6. And even though his team right now isn't doing that well, not because all the players are garbage and unredeemable, but because they're really bad at facilitating a style and always winning the lanes that need to be done to create this jungle carry style. And if you watch Dandy, all of his decisions are logical and adaptable. It makes sense within the realm of a situation that requires you to do certain things from behind. I have an article on this. I will link it. I will stop talking about Dandy. But I think that Dandy still has to be considered the greatest jungler of all time. Is Clearlove the greatest Chinese player of all time? As soon as I say this, people will call me ridiculously biased, but I think it's still Wei Xiao. I think it's still Wei Xiao. I think that more and more it's becoming harder to say it's Wei Xiao, but the point is that when Wei Xiao was at his peak, you could not have these discussions. Like, I think it's Dandy, or I think it's Clearlove, I think it's Dandy, you could not have these discussions. It was just Wei Xiao. Wei Xiao was just the greatest player. He was in season 2, like before Faker showed up, Wei Xiao was like the shit. He was the god. And he showed new ways to play this champion that no one had ever seen before. He could play ridiculously risky without getting in trouble. He could afford to extend the laning phase because he could just control it like this. And SECF isn't necessarily the best laning support, right? He's actually fairly reactive and fairly defensive as a support. But Wei Xiao would just kill people. He would do the triple kills. He would be crazy all around the map. Even people argue the same thing about Wei Xiao that they argue about Dandy, is that because when his team wasn't doing well and didn't seem to have synergy in season 3, he was bad. But there are still some of my favorite AD carry play games of all time are from season 3 WE games. Like, one that I watch a lot is PE versus WE, the only game in the regular season in season 3, the PE won, which because it was like Name's Twitch versus Wei Xiao's Ezreal, and it was just so good from them, like as a back and forth. And I think Wei Xiao still finished the game with some stupid score like 10-1 and 9, even though they lost. It's just, for me, it's really hard to get past that. And I think that probably if EDG make it to Worlds again, and they place at least quarters again, you can probably start to say that Clearlove is the greatest Chinese player. But it's just, I can't get past the thing, like how impressive Wei Xiao was. And maybe that means my glasses were rose colored and all this other things. And then Wei Xiao was still good in season 4 too, I think. There were a lot of issues with his shot calling and the fact that the meta switched to the 2v2, and he maintained that he had to go top and freeze top and farm, and they would lose dragons and fall behind. And you could see the shift in the standings where one of the best teams in China, the third best team in China flipped, or the fourth best team in China flipped from WE to LGD very quickly. And at a time, WE were actually the third best team, and because it again switched more to bot lane 2v2s, UZI and Star Honor Club whoop, up in the standings really quickly. So for me, all of this evidence, it's still really hard for me to say Clearlove is better than Wei Xiao. I can't let it go. I can't. It's really telling that they were on the same team together, and it was one of the greatest teams in the world. And Clearlove has actually said that Xiao is the one player that he admires, because at the time when they were together, they would just like constantly push each other and butt heads to get better. And they have a really interesting relationship that maybe one day I'll write about. But that's about it. Anyway, hope you liked the video, and that's all.